Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you're joining us today, we've actually got a really fascinating stack of research in front of us.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible paper.
It really is. It details the creation of something called VOLMO, which stands for Versatile and Open Large Models for Ophthalmology.
Right.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore how this surprisingly compact, open source AI model is stepping in to solve a massive global health crisis.
Which is preventing irreversible vision loss, yeah.
Exactly. And remarkably, it's doing it better than the massive billion-dollar AI models built by the big tech giants.
It's honestly completely flipping the script on medical AI.
But, to understand why this matters to you, we really have to look at the reality of modern medicine.
Yeah.
Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of, mechanical precision.
Mm-hmm. Like engineering.
Right. Like you break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, well, there it is.
It's very binary. Broken or not broken, it's a clean narrative, and frankly, it's comforting.
Yeah.
We naturally gravitate toward medical problems that can be easily visualized and categorized.
But then you step into the microscopic, incredibly complex landscape of the human eye.
Yeah.
And suddenly that X-ray machine is just broken.
Right. It doesn't work that way.
The diagnostic landscape is, well, honestly, it's murky. Early signs of devastating diseases aren't jagged white lines. They're practically invisible to the untrained observer.
They really are.
They're hidden in these subtle shifts of tissue or microscopic fluid leaks and tiny cellular deposits.
Which brings us to the stakes of this research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they are incredibly high. The data in this paper paints a pretty stark picture of where global eye health is heading.
Yeah, I was looking at the projections in the source material, and vision impairment is just skyrocketing.
It's a perfect storm.
It really is.
Yeah.
By the year 2050, age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, is projected to hit 21.34 million cases globally. And if you look at just the U.S. alone, the number of individuals living with visual impairment or blindness is expected to double by 2050, rising to more than 8 million people.
That's a staggering number.
But the part that really stopped me in my tracks was the data on diabetic retinopathy. Up to 50% of patients with this condition aren't diagnosed until the damage to their vision is irreversible.
Half of them.
Half. I mean, that's just unacceptable.
And we have to ask why that's happening, It's not a lack of imaging technology. We can take incredible pictures of the retina now.
Right.
The problem is human bandwidth. There simply aren't enough retinal specialists with enough hours in the day to analyze the millions of scans being produced.
So the bottleneck is the human expert.
Exactly. The human is the bottleneck.
Which is why, on the surface, artificial intelligence seems like the obvious silver bullet fix.
Sure.
You have millions of scans, not enough human eyes to look at them, so you feed them to a computer. Let the machine do the heavy lifting.
That is the logical assumption, yeah. But as we dig into this research, we're going to uncover why the current AI landscape has actually been failing eye doctors on a spectacular level.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can appreciate how revolutionary VOLMO is, we really have to look at why the incredibly powerful tools we already have are just, falling flat.
They're struggling, yeah.
The paper drops a statistic that honestly blew my mind. General multimodal AI models, the massive ones that can process both text and images, the ones making headlines every day, perform terribly in ophthalmology.
Terribly is almost an understatement in a clinical context.
Right. Let me give you the numbers. The researchers tested Google's Gemini Pro. They asked it to identify risk factors from OCT eye scans.
And really quickly, for those of us who aren't eye doctors, an OCT scan optical coherence tomography is basically like an ultrasound for your eye.
Oh, good.
But it uses light waves instead of sound waves to take a cross-section picture of your retina.
Got it. So they feed these OCT scans to Gemini Pro, and it scored a dismal 10.7% accuracy.
Which is just wild.
And then they tested GPT-4o, which is widely considered like the absolute state-of-the-art right now. And it only hit 54% accuracy for glaucoma screening.
Which is effectively a coin toss.
Yeah.
And, in a hospital setting, a 54% accuracy rate isn't just useless, it's a massive liability.
Absolutely. And I think for you listening, and definitely for me, there's a huge cognitive disconnect here.
Oh, for sure.
Wait a minute. These massive AI models can pass the bar exam. They can write complex Python code in seconds. They can write a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare.
Right.
Why are they basically guessing at random when looking at a standard medical image of a human eye?
What's fascinating here is the underlying architecture. We have to look at the difference between how general AI learns versus how true clinical reasoning actually works.
Okay.
Most of these giant general-purpose models rely on a mechanism called contrastive learning.
How did that work in practice? Like for a layman?
Think of it like a toddler sorting shapes into a bucket. The toddler learns that the wooden star goes into the star-shaped hole. In AI terms, the model is trained to map images and text into a shared mathematical space. It learns that a picture of an apple frequently appears next to the text apple, so it links them.
Makes sense.
But the AI has no idea what an apple tastes like, how it grows, or why it exists. It's just matching shapes. These models are fundamentally designed for retrieval and broad classification tasks.
So when it looks at an OCT scan, it might be able to say, yes, statistically, this arrangement of pixels looks like a retina,
Yes,
but it has no idea what that implies for the actual patient.
precisely. Current models lack ophthalmology-specific reasoning. Clinical practice isn't just playing a game of image matching.
Right, a doctor doesn't just look at a scan and yell glaucoma.
Exactly. They synthesize the patient's medical history, their visual acuity scores, their age, and the incredibly subtle nuances in the imaging to formulate a cohesive assessment.
And a multi-step treatment plan, I assume.
Yes. A model built on contrastive learning simply doesn't possess the capability to reason through those sequential, complex medical variables.
Put that way, it makes perfect sense. I mean, if you or a family member goes to the eye clinic because your vision is blurring, you don't want an AI that's like pretty good at everything from writing poetry to identifying dog breeds.
No, you definitely don't.
You want an expert specialist who has dedicated their entire existence to the eye. And that is the exact gap VOLMO was built to fill.
Right.
But you can't just take a general model and ask it nicely to be a specialist.
No, you can't prompt engineer your way into a medical degree. The researchers had to build a specialist from the ground up using a highly structured, data-open framework.
So how do they do it?
They essentially designed a digital medical school.
Let's walk through that medical school pipeline, because the researchers broke VOLMO's training down into 3 very distinct, fascinating stages. And stage 1 is what they call ophthalmology knowledge pre-training.
Yeah, this is injecting the foundational domain knowledge. They fed the model 86,965 image text pairs, pulled from over 26,000 ophthalmology journal articles.
Across like 82 different medical journals, right?
Exactly.
But the data they pulled from those journals wasn't clean. I mean, you can't just dump raw textbook pages into an AI and expect it to learn, right?
Oh, no. That is a massive hurdle in medical data science. Real-world medical data is exceptionally messy.
I can imagine.
The captions under medical images in academic journals are written for other specialists, not for computers. They're often highly fragmented.
Like using a lot of shorthand.
Yeah, dense clinical jargon or obscure abbreviations like T1WI.
What does that even mean?
It stands for T1-weighted image. It's a term borrowed from MRI scans that sometimes bleeds into other fields. Or the caption might just start mid-sentence, assuming the reader already has the context of the whole article.
Right.
If you feed that fragmented mess to an AI, it learns a fragmented, confused version of medicine.
So how do they bridge that gap? How do you teach the model to read the textbooks properly without a human spending, 10 years rewriting every single caption?
They actually use large language models as a data cleaning tool.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. Before feeding anything to VOLMO, they ran the raw, fragmented journal text through an LLM to expand those abbreviations, fix the syntax, and generate coherent, natural language descriptions.
Descriptions that linked the visual features to the medical concepts clearly.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. So stage 1 is basically pre-med. The AI is in the library, reading all the freshly cleaned textbooks, learning the language of the eye.
Right.
But book smarts don't equal street smarts. Knowing the definition of a disease doesn't mean you can spot it in a real patient. How did they move from theory to practice?
That requires stage 2, which is domain task fine-tuning. The researchers brought in 26,929 manually annotated instances covering 12 specific critical eye conditions.
So we're talking about major diseases like glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, and macular edema.
Correct.
And conditions like that are notoriously difficult to spot early. Take macular edema, for example. That's when fluid builds up in the macula, the center of the retina.
Right.
The swelling can be microscopic at first. Or drusen, which are these tiny yellow deposits of lipids and proteins under the retina that signal early macular degeneration.
Yes.
To a layman or a general AI, I mean, it just looks like a slightly blurry pixel.
Exactly. And in stage 2, they didn't just train the model to output a simple label like drusen present. They created a standardized instruction response schema.
Meaning what exactly?
The model had to learn to answer structured clinical questions about the scans, identify the specific disease, and classify its severity.
So if stage 1 was pre-med, stage 2 is clinical rotations. The AI is walking the wards, looking at thousands of specific cases, learning not just to spot the 12 major diseases, but to stage them from mild to severe.
Exactly.
But there is still one piece missing. Spotting a disease isn't the same as treating a patient.
Which is why stage 3 is where VOLMO truly separates itself from anything else on the market. Stage 3 is multi-step clinical reasoning. They train the model on 913 comprehensive, full patient case reports.
This is their residency. This is where the AI actually has to sit down, so to speak, with a whole patient profile.
It's the synthesis of everything it learned. Stage 3 forces the model to mimic a multi-turn conversation with a physician.
Wow.
It takes in the patient's demographic data, their chief complaint, their medical history, and the scans. Then, instead of jumping to a conclusion, it generates a differential diagnosis.
Like a logical list of possible conditions.
Exactly. From there, it identifies the most likely diagnosis with a written justification. It creates an assessment of the disease stage, and finally, it prescribes recommended treatments and follow-up care.
It performs sequential reasoning.
It performs sequential reasoning.
It's acting like a human doctor. But here is the massive technical catch. Having a medical degree, passing your clinical rotations, and finishing your residency doesn't help you at all if your vision is blurry.
No, it doesn't.
And this transitions us from how the AI thinks to how the AI actually sees.
This is a crucial, often overlooked bottleneck in medical AI. Standard multimodal models, like the popular open source model, 𝗢�59, for instance, they have a strict input resolution.
Right.
When you feed them an image, they typically downsample or shrink every single image to a rigid 224 by 224 pixels, or sometimes 336 by 336 pixels.
Okay, let me push back on this for a second. Why does downsampling matter so much? Because, our smartphones compress and downsample images all the time when we text a photo to a friend, and we don't even notice the difference.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of ophthalmology, we have to remember that we aren't looking at a photo of a sunset.
Fair point.
The details aren't just aesthetic, they are purely diagnostic. In eye care, the early signs of disease like those tiny drusen deposits we mentioned, or microscopic nerve fiber thinning in early glaucoma, those markers might only be 2 or 3 pixels wide in the original massive high-resolution scan.
Oh, wow. So if you take a massive medical scan and compress the whole thing down to a 224 pixel square,
you literally erase the disease from the scan. It's digitally blurred out of existence. The AI can't diagnose what is no longer there.
that is a massive blind spot. But wait, if you can't shrink the image to fit the AI's processing window, and a standard computer can't process a massive raw medical image all at once without crashing the system's memory, you're kind of stuck.
You are.
Unless you chop the image up into smaller pieces.
That is the exact logic behind VOLMO's visual architecture, which is called intern-VL. Instead of shrinking the whole image, intern-VL breaks the high-resolution medical scan into a grid of multiple 448 by 448 pixel tiles.
By taking a magnifying glass and moving it quadrant by quadrant over a giant map.
Exactly. It analyzes each high-resolution tile individually to find those microscopic abnormalities. But looking at tiles in isolation isn't enough. You need to know where that abnormality is located in the eye.
Right.
So the architecture uses something called a position-aware attention mechanism.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
It means the AI remembers the spatial coordinates of each tile. Just like if you are zooming in on a map of New York City, you need to remember if you're looking at Brooklyn or Manhattan.
Oh, okay, I get it.
The position-aware attention mechanism allows the AI to stitch its understanding of those highly detailed tiles back together into a global context. It preserves the microscopic details, the tiny lipid deposits, without losing sight of the whole retina.
Here's where it gets really interesting. With all of this advanced tiling technology and this incredibly deep 3-stage medical training spanning tens of thousands of documents, you would expect VOLMO to be a massive, computationally hungry beast of a model.
You would.
But it's not. VOLMO is tiny. It is only a 2 billion parameter model.
Which is astonishingly efficient. To give you context, it is competing against and beating models that have 27 billion parameters, or even the giant proprietary models that have hundreds of billions of parameters.
And the size is the whole point. Because it's only 2 billion parameters, it doesn't need a supercomputer. You can run VOLMO on a consumer-grade laptop with 8 to 16 gigabytes of RAM. You can run it locally on a standard gaming graphics card, like an RTX 3050.
Think about what that means for global health infrastructure. It means state-of-the-art diagnostic AI is no longer locked away behind a paywall in a multi-million-dollar server farm.
It's accessible.
Extremely accessible. It can be deployed right now, locally, to a standard laptop in a low-resource rural eye clinic anywhere in the world. And because it runs locally, it operates entirely without internet privacy concerns or bandwidth issues. Patient data never leaves the room.
It's the ultimate democratization of specialist knowledge.
Yeah.
But of course, being small and accessible is only valuable if the model is actually accurate.
Very true.
So now that we know how it's built and how it processes images, we need to look at the hard evidence. How does it actually perform in the real world against these massive tech giants?
The researchers ran rigorous head-to-head evaluations across a variety of clinical tasks, and the data is definitive.
It really is a blowout.
Right.
Let's look at the disease screening tasks first, looking for those 12 major conditions. VOLMO 2B crushed the baselines. It hit an 87.41% average F1 score.
That's incredibly high.
Right, and for those of us who aren't data scientists, F1 is essentially a metric that proves the AI isn't just crying wolf to get a high score. It measures the balance between precision, how many of the positive diagnoses were actually correct, and recall how many of the actual positive cases it managed to find.
Exactly.
So an 87.41% F1 score is incredibly robust. Just to compare, the giant Magema 27B model only hit 61.75%.
So a model a fraction of the size is outperforming a medical giant by nearly 26 percentage points.
And VOLMO dominated in staging the severity of diseases too, like determining the exact stage of a macular hole. But where the comparison gets truly wild and honestly a little scary is when we look at the actual text these models generate when they're confused.
This highlights the hallucination problem inherent in large language models.
I want to highlight figure 7 from the research paper because it perfectly illustrates the danger here. The researchers showed the models a visual field mean deviation map. It's a very specific type of ophthalmology scan that uses shading to show regional visual field loss. basically mapping out where a patient has blind spots.
It is a highly specialized image, but a very standard everyday diagnostic tool for an eye specialist.
Right. But when they fed this standard eye scan to the baseline 𝗩𝗵𝗄𝗏 model, the AI completely hallucinated. It decided the image was an ultrasound of the human brain.
Wow.
Yeah, it started confidently pointing out the cerebral hemispheres and the ventricles based on the shading of the eye map.
Which is deeply alarming. I mean, if a model cannot identify the fundamental organ it is looking at, any subsequent medical advice is inherently dangerous.
And it gets weirder. They showed the exact same visual field map to the base intern VL2B model, the general vision model, before it went through VOLMO's medical school.
What did it say?
It looked at the map and declared it was a spectrogram of an electrocardiogram, an EKG. It started talking about the electrical activity of the human heart. Meanwhile, VOLMO 2B looked at the exact same image and instantly, concisely, and correctly identified it as a visual field mean deviation map.
This raises an important question about the danger of AI verbosity in medicine. Large language models are fundamentally trained to predict the next most likely word in a sequence.
Right. They just want to give you an answer.
They are trained to sound helpful and confident. So when you read the outputs from the baseline models in this study, they write paragraphs of text. They produce confident-sounding, flowery, incredibly detailed nonsense.
They sound exactly like a medical student trying to bluff their way through an oral exam they didn't study for by just talking in circles.
Precisely. They use heavy vocabulary to mask a lack of comprehension. And in a clinical setting, that verbosity is a massive liability. The researchers actually had 2 real human ophthalmology residents manually evaluate the AI responses in a blind test.
Oh, that's interesting.
They graded them on how concise and medically accurate the output was. They gave VOLMO a 4.43 out of 5 for conciseness.
Nice.
The giant 𝗩𝗵𝗄𝗏 model, it scored a 2.06. Because in medicine, being concise and accurate is infinitely better than being creative and wordy. A busy doctor doesn't have time to read a 5-paragraph hallucination about a brain sonogram.
No, of course not.
VOLMO gives you exactly the clinical facts without burying you in hallucinatory filler.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We've explored the looming, terrifying crisis of global vision loss, millions of people facing preventable blindness because there just aren't enough human experts to review their scans.
Yes.
And we've seen that the solution isn't coming from throwing more computing power at massive general AI models that guess at random and hallucinate heart EKGs.
Definitely not.
The solution is VOLMO, a compact, open-source, highly specialized 2 billion parameter model that reads medical history, sees microscopic high-resolution details, and logically reasons exactly like a trained ophthalmologist.
It really represents a fundamental paradigm shift in how we approach medical technology. It proves that targeted, domain-specific training and high-resolution perception easily outperforms sheer parameter size when it comes to clinical accuracy.
And most importantly, it's about real-world application. It's about democratizing healthcare. It means faster, more accurate diagnoses without the clinical bottleneck. It means a doctor in a remote clinic with a standard off-the-shelf laptop can have a world-class retinal specialist sitting right there on their hard drive.
Yeah.
Potentially saving the sight of millions of people worldwide who would otherwise fall through the cracks.
It really leaves us with a provocative thought to mull over. Today, we've seen how a tiny 2 billion parameter model running on a standard laptop can outsmart massive AI giants simply because it was laser focused on one specific medical field.
Right.
As the tech industry rushes to build bigger and bigger general AI models, pouring billions of dollars into massive energy-hungry server farms, we have to ask, is the real future of artificial intelligence actually going to be found in hyper-specialized, smaller models that live right on our local devices?
It's a fascinating question, and one that might just change the entire landscape of how we interact with technology, data, and medicine in the coming decade. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of VOLMO. Keep questioning the world around you, and remember, sometimes the most precise answers come from looking closely at the details rather than trying to see everything all at once.